Dr. John Robinson, welcome back to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you. It's always good to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you back on the show again and again and again and again. It's been a number of times. And we spoke back in January of this year about your previous book,
Huh?
Mystical Activism, Transforming a World in Crisis. And today we're going to be discussing your latest book, Aging with Vision, Hope, and Courage in a Time of Crisis. So, how does this second book, this most recent one, relate to your earlier one?
Well, I should start off with a funny story. So I never planned to write this book. I had no idea that it was going to be out there. And then the publisher contacted me and he said he was building a team of 10 writers from his organization for a series on the coronavirus.
Uh-huh.
And the overarching theme was to be resilience in a time of crisis. Each person would write a different book depending on their specialty. He wanted me to write one for people over 65 because of my long-term interest in conscious aging. But the challenge was that we had to write it in 3 weeks.
Ah.
The average time it takes from a conception to a hard copy is like 18 months or longer.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, this is going to be great fun, but how are we going to do it? So I immediately accepted and I started writing it like, 4 a.m, every day before the dawn. And I was writing away and I finally, after 3.5 weeks, had it finished. It was really amazing. Whereafter my back went out
Uh-oh.
and my piriformis muscle went out. My
Oh, no.
piriformis muscle still hurts. So my recommendation to all writers is do not sit in front of a computer 7 hours a day.
Yeah, really.
It will destroy you.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, the reason I was so excited about this was that, I've been writing about conscious aging for, 25 years now. And more recently, I came to see that a spiritual and mystical awareness of life was also really important for this escalating climate crisis. So that's the last book that you were talking about.
Yes, right.
So I was out there promoting that and sharing it with people and so forth. But then when the coronavirus burst upon the scene, I realized that climate change was only one of a new 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Four
Right.
horsemen of the apocalypse. See, the storied marauders of old, remember, death, plague, war, and famine. They
Yeah.
had morphed into COVID-19, climate change, unrestrained population growth, and the unraveling of modern civilization. I mean, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. We are
Wow.
moving into a sustained global crisis, and not more than just a writer. I'm a husband and a father. I've got 7 grandchildren. I got friends, and I fear for the future of my family and my descendants as I'm sure you and your listeners fear for the future of your loved ones. So this really got me, this whole topic. I guess that's why I worked on it so hard. It's not
Mhm.
academic to me.
That's
It's in
right.
my awareness every day, in emails and news reports and telephone conversations and articles I write. And I do a webinar once a month on the climate and crisis called um, the climate, what's it called? Well, anyway, it's through the creation spirituality communities. Creation in Crisis is the name of it. But anyway, so I'm constantly in touch with this. So this book then poured out of my soul. It's meant for people 65 and older who are wrestling, with fear and despair and insecurity, loneliness, dread, about what's happening. So it was meant to be, or it's meant to be a blend of psychology, self-help, spirituality, and even mysticism. And it's tailored for, my generation, my demographic. I'm 74 years old now. This is just, I know what I'm talking about because it's about me and my friends and everybody I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
is in this demographic. And so my goal is to move us as a cohort, as a community, from denial and fear and paralysis, to growth,
Right.
adaptation, and engagement. So that's,
Well, have you been talking to other people in our cohort uh, to hear the kinds of concerns that they're expressing?
oh yes, yeah. It's
Yeah.
I
Well,
talk.
tell us what you're hearing, what you're learning.
Well, it depends on which part of the cohort. People who call up our webinar are very tuned in, and they're talking about the actual changes they're watching in their neighborhoods, and the flooding that's coming in, and the changing fish populations and the heat and all that stuff that's beginning to be so undeniable. And yet, at the other end of the continuum are people who are saying, and this is why I wrote the book, that hey, what's a little warm weather? It's going to be summer all the time. What's the problem? They're making this
Yeah.
thing too overblown. But the latest research, the latest surveys show that 70% of the world now is very concerned about climate change. 70%, except in America, where like 85% of Democrats are very concerned and 12% of Republicans are very concerned.
Yeah.
So we are really behind the curve because of our
Yeah.
administration.
What about COVID-19 fears? Have you been hearing from people about those?
Oh, all the time. I'm sure we all have about dozens of stories about that, right? Fear of going into places wearing masks, being angry at people who don't wear masks because they
Yeah.
don't know that they could kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really prevalent everywhere and very disturbing. And Washington State here, Governor Inslee has just made it mandatory. Everybody has to wear masks, and that felt like a kind of a relief to me.
Yeah. Right. Um, so, what is your approach to helping older people with these issues?
So I laid out my book in this kind of a format. I wanted to start off with the good news. You can scare people really badly with this stuff. I didn't want to like hammer on people on that. So the good news was that, first of all, we minimize our gifts as older men and women of the 21st century. I mean, we've come through an extraordinary lifespan. I've made a list of all the things we've dealt with, everything from constant wars and economic turmoil, natural disasters, technological advances, medical discoveries, scientific achievements, social and political change, the tumultuous Trump, presidency, so much, and we're still here. I mean, we're still standing. So the first message I have for people is that we are resilient, and we can stand up to this process. It's a testament to our strength. And the second thing was I wanted us to understand, because I'd been so focused on it, on the gifts and the profundity of aging. We have a new aging experience going on now, because for all of recorded history, only 1 in 10 people could ever hope to get to be 65. Now, in developing countries, nearly 8 out of 10 people will get to be 65. And if you get to be 65, you get another 16 years for men and 19 for women on the average, which means that we are actually in a new developmental stage in the human life cycle. It's really astounding. And what's beautiful about this is that all the evidence and all my experience with saging organizations and workshops and so forth is that we're still growing. This is not a time of sitting around in our wheelchairs or rocking chairs and declining. This is a process of renewal and growth and rebirth and reblossoming. There's another blossom on the spiritual tree of our lives. So I emphasize that and the tasks and gifts of aging, so people will be ready, for bad news, which has to come next,
Yeah.
because you cannot sugarcoat this stuff. So I really wanted to tell the truth. Because I believe that the truth about this global crisis is critical to our survival and to our mobilization, to our civilization. Our generation can handle the truth. The hardship is real and it's here. So, and really, if you take a deep breath, you almost have to just shudder when you realize that the fate of humanity is now on the tipping point.
Yeah.
And the earth is crying out for our help in the loudest ways it knows how to do so, by literally threatening us with extinction. So that said, then I move into providing very practical tools for coping with this, particularly coping with things like um, overwhelming emotions. Is so easy to get just blown away by this, or managing depression, or cultivating personal growth in a time of crisis,
Yeah.
or instilling hope when there's none, and at the same time providing exercises for reducing anxiety and practicing gratitude, because I wanted people to have something they could work with in,
Yeah.
in this
Well,
time.
well, tell us about some of those. Take us through some of those skills and all. And you were talking about how we have this extended lifespan of growth, because I guess because we are not debilitated by illness, so there's room to think about higher things and so on.
Yeah.
We may have a certain amount of physical challenge that we're dealing with as we get older, but still we have a lively mind, many
Hmm.
of us,
Oh,
and
yes.
And so that can feed into uh, being resilient.
Yeah. So
So,
I looked at it on 5 levels, really. I mean, I looked at the practical things that we need to do, from the basics of survival, food, shelter, medicine, safety, water, those kinds of things that we need to plan for, and the need for accurate information about the world and what's going on, and then for the critical importance of organizing local communities, because
uh-huh.
we're going to need to depend on each other for everything as the culture begins to come apart. So that's one, but I don't get into that as much because that's really outside the purview of the book. But psychologically speaking, we when we lift the lid of denial on this, the magnitude of our impending trauma is feels crushing and unbearable. I've read numerous interviews from climate scientists who just describe breaking down, falling apart, with the realization from their own science, from their own data about what's coming, and not knowing how to communicate this to people without grief and despair and helplessness that they have to deal with. But so as a therapist, though, I provide checklists now then for coping with overwhelming emotions, what to do, what not, how to deal with depression, how to keep busy and active, and how to process feelings. And so I give a lot of very practical things to work with, because we need to do, especially as we're sheltering in place. I mean, you don't just get to go to a support group, though you could do a lot of things on Zoom. We need to work with ourselves all the time in coming through this. Um,
Yeah, one
so
of the things that I've been talking about and aware of is that um, as social creatures, social animals, uh, physical presence is important. Our contact with other people in terms of touch and just
yes,
seeing in actuality instead of through a screen, it actually helps to maintain our brain. We we count on each other for that to keep our brains tuned up.
yeah, I totally agree with you. I do numerous Zoom things, but my we did my Zoom men's group, but then we figured out a way that we could actually meet outside of a restaurant with our masks on in our
Uh-huh.
own little private circle in the parking lot. We're a strange looking group, but the owner, because we've been coming there for so long, was very kind, took care of us, and provided us outdoor eating. We have a spirituality group now that meets outside around a campfire with a lot of social distancing, spacing. That's very meaningful. I talk to my brothers every Sunday night on Zoom, and it's amazing to me how really deep you can go even on Zoom. But
Yeah,
it brings that allows us to feel the realness of what love is and why we're here and what aging is all about in this time
yeah.
of crisis. So
As you know, I've been in a men's group a long time myself, and we've been meeting on Zoom. Um, I'm trying to remember if it's every week or every other week. See, that's by cognitive slippage with all of this. Uh, but we have not. I'm going to take a tip from what you've said and kind of explore with them the idea that maybe we could meet with, with some social distancing, and maybe we could even find a nice space in which to do it rather than a parking lot.
somebody's patio, somebody's backyard,
Yeah,
it's quite doable, and I think really quite safe.
yeah, yeah. That's a good suggestion. I think we have at least one person I'm thinking of in the group who has I think a very nice house for that,
hmm
or
And being
backyard.
outdoors helps too, because it brings you back into the natural world, which we're all just hungry for at this
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah. So I also talk about spirituality in the book, because everybody has spiritual beliefs of one sort or another about ultimate issues like the meaning of life, or the value of love, or the nature of suffering, or the transcendent, however you experience it. And these beliefs really provide a ground of coping mechanisms for us. And so to help people recover what they believe most deeply can provide a supportive framework of hope and understanding in these hard times. So I provide guidance for engaging one's own unique spirituality. And I also then emphasize the importance of mysticism. Now, I need to say in passing that mysticism is so easily disparaged and misunderstood after centuries of belittlement
yeah.
and
Right.
persecution. But,
Yeah,
but it's not woo woo and it's not far out. It's just moments when you open your senses to the awesome beauty and perfection of being. So in other words, when you stand like the my book has a wonderful picture on the cover of a man standing at the base
Oh, yeah.
of those ancient redwood trees, thousands of years old.
Yeah.
You can all remember a time when you just stood in Yosemite or in the sequoias or someplace and your mouth drops open, your thinking stops, and you just feel you're in the presence of the sacred. Or when you meet your newborn infant for the first moment and you just can't, you don't have a single thought, you're so in awe. Awe is the door that opens to the sacred, and the sacred is really all about those moments when the mind stops, perception heightens, and we begin to suddenly experience the sacredness that pervades creation. So the mystical experience is a breakthrough of the divine into personal awareness.
Mhm.
And why that's important is this. We have we have so removed ourselves from creation. We didn't get kicked out like the Bible says. We left on our own accord now because our waking hours are constantly spent in cars, houses, offices, coffee shops, jobs, and our consciousness is constantly consumed and maybe even polluted by TV, cell phones, headphones, video games, internet, news feeds, social media. And so we have left creation. We almost spend no time in the firsthand experience of the sacred world. So as a result, we don't even see the sacred world anymore. And that's why we're in crisis. Creation has been suffering around us for decades, and we haven't even noticed. And the most of the people who are active in mystical traditions really argue that we need to go outside and sit in the world as it is. And in the silence of mind, if you spend some real intense time with the life around you, you will discover that it's alive and conscious, and the more we have a felt presence and a felt connection to it, the more we care.
Yeah.
It's going to take that kind of transformation that will bring us to life to do something about our world, which is dying around us, which is why I had this wonderful story. 25 years ago, when Jungian and I did our first class on conscious aging, she came across this wonderful book called The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time. I don't think it's still in print, but I'm sure you can find copies. And it's a wonderful story. It's a retelling of a Sufi poem by the Sufi mystic Attar called The Conference of the Birds, and it depicts this spiritual journey that's universal in all spiritual journeys, but with enormous prescience. The woman who did it, Anne Baring, rewrote it in such a way that it anticipates its profound relevance to our current global crisis. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story in a minute. And I suddenly thought to myself, God, I know that story. Where is it? And in another most serendipitous way, I stood up, walked to my file cabinet, and went right to it. I hadn't seen it in 25 years. I went
Wow.
right to it. And then I thought, and then my publisher said, well, if you're going to do a version of this, you need to talk to the author. I thought, oh yeah, right, okay. So is she even around? So I go online, and there she is. I emailed her. We have this wonderful exchange. She writes this wonderful endorsement of my book. you know, she says this book is so urgent. It is a brilliant and comprehensive manual for understanding and surviving this very challenging and confusing time. So she and I had this wonderful relationship, and then we work with the story. And here's the gist of the story. The story is a parliament of the Conference of the Birds. So it begins with thousands and thousands of birds from around the world coming to this beautiful glen, and they have been called by the earth to help her. And the earth basically says to them, I have called you here to ask you for your help. I am sick. My rivers are poisoned. My forests are dying. My air is polluted. My creatures are suffering. Humans kill each other with hate. Will you help me? Will you take a long and difficult journey to save my life? I mean, God, this is exactly what we are all about right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then she says to them as well, you have to pass through these 7 dark and treacherous valleys, each one controlled by a terrifying monster.
Mm.
And what was so cool about the story was that each valley actually describes a defensive posture that we take to avoid coming to terms with this. For
Hmm.
example, there is the valley of doubt. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. So, and in the story, it has to do with the voice. The monsters have this capacity to speak their message from as if from inside the birds. So the birds hear what they think are their own thoughts coming up and telling them, "You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You'll never survive this journey. You will fail
Oh,
miserably."
yeah.
You know,
Yeah, we know that one.
exactly. So then I thought, well, how does this apply to, the corona, to this catastrophe we're coming up against? How are we avoiding it? So the valley of doubt, I translated it to things like, this situation is not going to be bad. I don't really see it happening. Most people don't get that sick with the virus, or the earth's getting a little warmer, big deal, summer everywhere. The whole thing is getting
Or it's just
exaggerated.
the old people.
It was just the old people. What good are they anyway?
Yeah, right.
And so then the next valley was the valley of false dreams. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with? But then, oh well, of course, the false dreams are signs or someone's going to save us. With so many
Yeah.
smart people working on this, I don't have to do anything. And so we go through each of these 7 valleys,
Uh-huh.
really having to face how our denial, our passivity, our avoidance, our fear-based, reluctance to even engage the stuff. So once it's finally over, I mean, once you finally, and what's
Oh, take
interesting,
us through the
well,
other valleys.
okay, let me go through the other valleys. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the valley of envy, the valley of envy. The valley of envy says, um, I know rich people who have way more money than me, so they'll survive better. It's not fair. I envy old people who will die naturally and not have to face these problems. Young people don't get sick. Why me? I'm important. I'm rich. I'm smart. Envy me. Look at me. I don't even use plastic straws. I mean, we can get tangled up in these kinds of belief systems and not move on in the journey.
Yeah.
Next one's the valley of hate. I hate people who make me feel frightened and guilty. I hate people who are trying to take what's mine, those immigrants. I hate people exaggerating and trying to scare me. I hate the government. They don't care about us. I hate the rich. They have it. It's so easy to get caught up in this kind of negativity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fifth valley is the valley of power. If I align myself with really powerful people, we can control food, water, and other resources. We can build our own walls and keep others out. We have guns. We'll take what we need. I'm superior. I'm always right. I know everything. And don't mess with me. So that's the temptation and the seduction of power we'll take for ourselves, whatever else is up to you to deal with.
Yeah.
And then the valley of cruelty. The weak, they deserve what they get. It's a dog eat dog world. Hey, if you're not prepared, that's your problem. And I don't talk to stupid people. Get off my land. I mean, do you see how this all fits into what we're still doing? It's not just a
Yeah.
spiritual journey, it's a
Yeah.
journey of denial. And then the last one, which is perhaps really the most profound, which is the valley of despair. Because you have to reach this place, and it's hopeless, it's overwhelming. There's nothing we can really do. It's too late. We're going to die anyway. What's the point of trying? I just want to go quickly. I'm too old to fight. You see, can you hear these whispers inside? We've all said them.
Oh, yeah. And we've heard them from other
We've heard
people.
them. Yeah. And what's interesting is that along the way in the story, a group of these birds drops away with each of these valleys. They
Oh,
get
yeah.
seduced into these belief systems and they die or they leave or they just don't. So it's only a very small proportion of them that reach the end. And at the end, they have there's one more task they have to do, which is really very mystically profound. It has to be, you have to you have to find this mysterious sea, go to the bottom of the sea, find the great being dwelling there in a beautiful garden, and bring back a message that might save the earth's life.
Hmm.
And that message is exactly what I've been talking about for the last 10 years. I mean, it was so beautifully consistent. It's the message that we find in mystical activism, and it's the ultimate message of this book. So I'm not gonna be I'm doing a spoiler alert. You have to read the book if you want to find what she says. But I can tell you on the general level what it is that
Okay.
what we're trying to do here, because it's so important. And the reason I did this was the mess. You know how stories work. You in all these men's gatherings, you tell a story, and people get caught up in it. And pretty soon, we are the birds. And pretty soon we're in this valley and we're in that valley, and these things are happening to us, and the grief is striking us. We give up hope, and then the hoopoe, this little bird that's been leading us through, calls us and re-inspires us again to move on, because we are going to come up against some really hard, awful times in this process. Will we give up, or will we reorganize ourselves in community? Because it's all about doing it in community. And so the ultimate step in this catastrophic time is opening our hearts again to creation, okay, to the place that gave birth to us. And Matthew Fox says it in a very sweet way. He says, an absence of the sacred is the basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically or environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. He says, more and more than ever, we need to stop and sit and be present and allow our love for the world and the world's love for us to be deeply felt. Love will be the source of our energy and of our imaginations that will render us effective agents for deeper change, not superficial change, but a change that begins and ends with the reverence and gratitude we carry in our hearts toward the universe that has birthed us. This is not, this can't be a mental thing, and it can't be a Hallmark card. It can't be a happy thought. It has to be something that you deeply drop into in the being of your being, and discover that your being is the same as the ferns being, and the same as the cows being, and the fishes, and the same as the sky. We were all made of the same stuff. And when we feel that, we realize that everything happening to creation is happening to me and you, and to the ones I love. And I cannot bear, it makes me really emotional, I cannot bear what I see. For a number of months last year, I had this, I called it the haunting. I just kept seeing 10 years ahead in time of what, I mean, I had a deep dive into the literature of climate change. Then I began to see beyond the science. I began to see what the picture would look like, of dying streams that no longer feed communities down the way, and animals and fish, and heat waves that comes, in 50 years, 3 billion people are going to be living in environments too hot to survive in because of global warming, because this massive heating that's taking place around the earth. You can multiply that by 100 different factors. And when we put it all together, the coronavirus, which is actually only one of countless thousands new zoonotic viruses, these viruses that live in the exotic remote wilderness, that with our climate change problems we are hacking into. We break open the wilderness, we break open these animals' bodies, and then we expose ourselves to viruses that come out and take over the world, that were living peacefully and not causing anybody a problem before.
Yeah. Wow.
Scientists say there are thousands of these viruses in these animals, and they're all going to start coming out if we keep doing this. Well, then there's the climate change, which is, the scientists are so clear about that. What we do in the next 10 years, it determines the fate of humanity. I can give you 1,000 quotes on that. And then there's the population expansion. When the Earth, when America was formed, there were 1 billion people on Earth. When you and I were children, there were 2.6 billion people. Remember those statistics? I actually remember hearing that. And then, but then in now there's like what is it now? Right now there's 7.7 billion, and by 2050 there will be 9 billion people on Earth. 9 billion people on Earth. And so because of this enormous population growth, we borrow from the future. We drain aquifers. We cut down forests for farming, overfish oceans. All these things are starting to mount up. Unless we really get that we're all in this together, including all sentient beings, the animals, the fish, the insects, the lizards, life itself is in this matrix. And until we fall in love again and come to our knees and realize what is at stake here, we will just go on our merry ways and want to go back to going to bars and partying. The young people, at least a lot of them, don't get it.
It's hard to let all that in. It's just such an
hard.
overwhelming set of the perfect storm.
That's why the Valleys story really hit me so hard, because it captured why it's so hard.
Yeah.
So Where should we go with this?
Let's see here. Well, we may not have enough material to go as long as we sometimes
Well,
have
no, let me say
gone.
one more thing because I wanted to say how it is that these things all interact because it is like you say it's a perfect storm.
Yeah,
Okay, so the pandemics, the climate change, the population growth all interact to accelerate this disorganizing and this breakdown of our all the systems, supply systems and communication systems and human life systems that hold us all together. So food shortages are going to happen due to crop failures from heat, drought, floods, and locusts. That stuff is real. Insufficient resources on the earth to feed our growing, increasingly global population. Extreme weather creates massive storms, tornadoes, and cyclones which break down infrastructure and transportation and economics. Sea levels and coastal flooding and overfishing and acidic oceans are going to affect everything around the coast and our supply of fish food. Extinct 150 species go extinct every day. So it is scary, but there are many organizations now. There are probably 50 organizations from Greta Thunberg on that are tackling this. So the thing is, my recommendation is to go online and join one. You
yeah,
know, to get the information, to talk to your friends, to start local discussion groups, so you can really say, well, what can I do? Well, it turns out you can do a ton of stuff, including, not being such a consumer, finding the role that you have in society, which can be anything from a teacher to an engineer to a mystic to a leader to a spiritual teacher. There's a million ways. Whatever your gift is, whatever you come here in life to give to the world, that's what you can do at this time. If you're wondering what the meaning of your life is, it's now. It's this. It's
yeah,
here.
right. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a very important message, and it's hard to doubt it, given that we see it unfolding already in so many ways.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
can see, in each of those areas, we can see things happen. We see the flooding that's happening, the climate change blowing away people's houses. They rebuild, they get blown away again.
It is
Uh, it
horrifying.
floods again, the fires, etc. We could just go on and on. So there really is an urgency, and I like your call for us to get in touch with well, what's our gift? What can we each do? You and I are both talkers and hopefully inspirers. And
Hmm.
so that's what we're doing. What I'm doing is talking to you, helping you get your message out, and other people. And so hopefully we're exercising our skills.
I was trying to
One of
find
the
a.
things that's bringing me through at the moment is a rebirth of energy as an older person, uh, having gotten a coming together of various things has got me into writing poetry. And
Yeah.
I'm finding that's opened up a whole new energy stream that helps me cope with the current situation.
You want to read us one of your poems?
Well, I had thought of doing that, but I didn't want to pull away from you and your message, and so I don't have one close at
Okay.
hand. But people who are followers of this show will be getting exposed to them because
Good.
I'm putting them out there. I'm putting them on Facebook, and I'm going to put them more and more into the newsletter that I do, the monthly newsletter. And so, yeah, they're going to
I
be out
wanted to
there.
say that this is a process of deep discernment because one of the things that goes wrong with our efforts to help the world is that we think that we have to do everything, or we get heroic.
Exactly.
We have to
Right.
solve the world, or we have to join every organization. And then what happens is you burn out. You
Yeah.
just cannot. This has to come from a place inside you that is associated with is what you were born to do in the world. That
Yes.
now for us as therapists, it may be that we are very good at being present to people and helping them awaken their personal growth. So we may that may be maybe having a good discussion group or write poetry, stuff that brings people alive. I made a list of all the things that you could be, and let me read it. It's in the book, and
Okay.
because I think that the people could. And what I do is invite people to just listen thoughtfully and then see which of these roles lights the fire inside, because one or more of them is going to say, oh, wait a minute, that is me. That is what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
So here are the different roles we could take. Climate warrior, defending creation against the continuing assault of development, pollution, exploitation through social protest and disobedience. This is really active activism. Citizen lobbyist, pressuring local, state, national governments to declare a climate emergency and adopt climate legislation. Or you could be a gardener or animal lover, nourishing and supporting life in all of its forms. I mean,
Mhm.
so many people love animals. That's the place that the animals need our help.
Yeah.
Healer, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual wounds in human and non-human beings, nurturing the hurt back to and broken back to life. How many of us are healers, and how can we use that to heal the world? Artists, expressing and welcoming the Spirit's powerful message of loving creativity through your own work. Art literally is a transformation of consciousness. Or you could be a lover of creations, simply blessing every living thing with kindness, gratitude, and praise, whether it's at the supermarket or on walking your dog. You could be a skillful builder for a sustainable new world, an enlightened craftsman, engineer, laborer, farmer, planner, chef, inventor, lawyer, educator, whatever your career, if that's your calling, in it is an opportunity to serve the world.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could be contemplative, immersed in prayer and unity of consciousness, sending healing energies throughout creation. That's people do in monasteries. If they're doing it authentically, they're present. They're so one with the consciousness of the cosmos that their evolution of consciousness spreads everywhere. You could be a scientist, whether professional or amateur, seeking to understand the nature and causes of climate damage and its repair. You could be a spiritual leader, creating or revitalizing sacred ritual, celebration, and theology in service of creation. We have so many spiritual leaders out there. We could, if they can revitalize all their practices to be a blessing and an awakening of our oneness with creation, and send us out the door, loving the earth we walk upon, taking our shoes off. I mean, there's so many ways. You could be a social organizer, inspiring and mobilizing community planning for long-term local sustainability and climate action. You could be a conflict manager. Some people are just really good at that. Skilled in compassionate, nonviolent communication and community problem solving. I mean, we have all this left, right, political stuff. We need people who are helping others cross this divide, not just intensifying it.
Yeah.
You could be a volunteer. There's a million ways you can volunteer your time, energy, money, skills to climate active and political organizations. You could be a nature mystic. I think I'm a lot of a nature mystic. Going outside, falling in love with creation for continued support and inspiration. No matter what you do, spend time in creation, because it will talk to you about what can happen in your world and however you're working. And
Yeah.
last but not least, a reducer of your own carbon footprint through lifestyle changes and carbon offset programs and all of that. And
Well,
we have to remind ourselves that sacrifice, which is what that would be, comes from the Latin, and it means to make sacred.
uh-huh. Well, that might sound like pie in the sky to some people, but one of the wonderful things that come out of all the crises that are going on right now is seeing evidence of human nature expressing itself in very positive and uniting ways,
Yes.
with just amazing creativity and volunteerism that's being released from Black Lives Matter, and people who are stepping up to that whole process and standing with others and volunteering to provide food and volunteering to help people get out of jail, and you
It,
know and people singing through, as
exactly.
communities singing through the COVID, or uh, creating art. So there's so many just wonderful examples that, to me, really inspire me about human nature, that I think if we tap into it, there's good in all of us, and if we're just willing to tap into it and express it. And it's just heartening to see that so many people are doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Me too. I mean, we have been pushed to the edge of the cliff.
Hmm.
And instead of jumping over it's like this is suddenly causing us to, like the, Joanna Macy says, the threat of extinction, it may be hard to hear that word, but it also awakens you. It brings you to life. I mean, how many people really want to die right now? Well,
Yeah.
when you get that in your system, you start to respond, and each of us is a different instrument. And so I'm not the tuba, but I might be the violin or the piccolo, but play the one you are, and you're
Yeah.
helping. As Marshall, what's his name? Thurgood, no,
McLuhan,
yeah,
Marshall
anyway,
McLuhan.
he said the saying, I'll get his name back in a minute. This is that name finding thing. But he said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. He says, ask yourself what makes you come alive and go do it. Because
Uh-huh.
what the world needs is people who have come alive.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, this is such an important message, and I'm glad that you're back here reminding us of all of these things, and keep up your own good work.
Oh, thank you. And let me say, you can learn more at johnrobinson.org
Okay.
online. And you
Yeah.
can also learn more at about the whole series of 10 books on this, which you can find at www.changemakersbooks, one word, changemakersbooks.com. And you see all the other books in this series. And get the book and give it to all your older friends. And we shouldn't be sitting around giving up.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah.
become, we are sages now. We have the wisdom of a lifetime, and this is not our first rodeo, and we have done all this personal work on ourselves. Now is the time.
Dr. John Robinson, thanks for being my guest again on Shrink Rap Radio.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.